and no one announced it. There was no argument, no slam door, no dramatic refusal. On the morning of the wedding, the question of who would walk her down the aisle simply thinned. It became a practical problem instead of an emotional one, the way disappointment often does when it has been rehearsed for years. They called early. Her mother's voice was brisk, apologetic in a way that sounded efficient rather than sorry. Her sister had people coming over. A planning issue. A timing thing. Wouldn't she understand? She did. That was the trouble. Understanding had been her role for as long as she could remember. The dress hung where she could see it, ivory and uncomplicated. She stood in the quiet of the hotel room and tried to identify the feeling moving through her chest. It wasn't shock. Shock requires surprise. It was closer to a low, familiar ache, the kind that doesn't ask for attention because it knows it won't get it. When the ceremony began, there was a small rearrangement of bodies. An uncle stepped in, awkward but willing. No one explained anything to the guests. The music played. She walked. She smiled when she reached the end, because the person waiting for her was steady, present, and not confused about why they were there. If anyone noticed the absence, they were kind enough not to look for it. The day moved the way weddings do, forward, regardless of what's missing. Vows were exchanged. Glasses were raised. The room filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with obligation. She felt it in the way people leaned toward her, in the way conversations lingered. These were not the people her parents had imagined filling the room. These were colleagues who had become friends, mentors who had once insisted she speak up, the distant relatives who remembered her effort when her parents hadn't. Late in the evening, she sat for a moment alone, shoes off, listening to laughter ripple across the room. She thought of her sister's party, imagined the noise, the music too loud for the neighbors. She didn't resent it the way she might have once. Resentment takes energy. She felt instead a kind of clarity, sharp and quiet. The next day was ordinary. Brunch leftovers. Thank you messages. A slow packing of bags. It was her father who called, his voice different now, tentative, as if stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Your wedding, he said. It looked big. She knew what he meant. Photos had begun to circulate. Someone had tagged a regional director she worked with. Another guest had shared a picture with a caption about community leaders gathering to celebrate. A local paper had reposted an image from the reception. Nothing dramatic. Just a smiling group, recognizable names. There was a pause on the line. She could almost hear the recalculation. We didn't realize, her mother said later, when she took the phone. All those people. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even regret, not exactly. It was surprise at the scale of something they had stopped measuring years ago. They asked questions after that. Careful ones. What she did now, exactly. Who she worked with. Who had stood up to speak. Their tone had shifted, not softened, but adjusted, like people discovering they had misjudged the weight of an object they'd set down too easily. She answered politely. She did not fill in gaps for them. The power didn't change hands in a moment. There was no confrontation, no reckoning scene. It moved the way tides do, almost imperceptibly, until the shoreline looked different. Invitations from her parents arrived with more notice. Calls came without requests attached. They spoke of her sister less, not because the favoritism had vanished, but because it no longer anchored the conversation. And she noticed something else. She was no longer waiting for them to catch up emotionally before she moved forward. The wedding had happened without their guidance, without their blessing in the traditional sense, and the world had not collapsed. If anything, it had expanded. Months later, at a family gathering, her mother watched as someone asked her about a project she was leading. Listened as she answered, confident, unhurried. There was a flicker of something in her mother's expression, not pride exactly, but recognition. Too late, perhaps, but real. Nothing was fixed. Some absences don't close. They just stop hurting as much when you stop pressing on them. Her parents never apologized for the wedding. Her sister never acknowledged the choice that had been made. But the hierarchy that once defined her place had loosened its grip. On anniversaries now, she remembers the walk down the aisle less for who wasn't there and more for who was. The hands that steadied her. The faces that reflected her back to herself. She didn't gain parents that day. She gained proof. And that she found was enough to stand on, even if it meant standing slightly apart.